this is working. Click the sound up. There we go. All right, let's do some hand reviews. It was a good night last night. And do this, then get on to the next section. Pocket eights. Just called it. We're going 5 ways to a flop. Goes check, check, check. This is one where if you had a jack here, I think most people would bet. You know, if you had limp jack 10 or queen jack or something like that, I think most people would bet here to protect their hand. In this instance, I don't really see the merit in checking because there's only one player behind who hasn't acted yet. Everybody else hasn't shown any interest in the pot. It's 5 ways. Somebody could definitely have a jack. But these players have pretty much told me they don't have one. So I think betting is fine, and I'm betting just to protect it like I had a jack. Now, if somebody shows me that they may be interested in this pot, maybe I'll change my mind, but it's an easy way to take it down. And this is one that people miss. And this was a gain of 9.5 blinds for almost no effort and almost no risk. And this is one that people just check and go, oh, well, there's an overcard. It's not really a factor. You know, these players gave up, so just take it down. King, queen. See a limp and a raise out of the small. This is an interesting one because this player had been limping a lot of hands, and it was very... Here, let me see if I can get you some information here. It was very interesting because this player had been limping a lot of hands and not raising very many. Yeah, these stats aren't right. But either way, I think this player's was just trying to put on a squeeze when there was no raise. You really can't do that because if there was a raise here and a 3-bet, it kind of announces intention. This is not an easy steal because you don't know what's going on here. You don't know how often this player is going to call. So this bet being this huge, and you didn't even have to make it 4.8. He honestly could have made it 3.5, and it's just as effective, which not very. I go ahead and call it because I'm well aware I'm going to get called behind. So 3-1 with king queen versus a player overplaying his hand is fine by me. I'm not really worried about the guy behind, and this is one where we're just trying to make a hand and flop the queen. Player bets 1/3 pot. I mean, you can see he only has 28 blinds left. So this is going to be pretty easy for him to go bet, bet, bet and get it all in with no real backup. The real problem behind folds because he can have anything. And at this point, I'm basically just never giving it up. He now jams all in. That's a full pot size bet. Of course, I call. And he had just absolute airball. And this is just one of those situations where you got to realize what the intention of the player is. And if his bet on the flop were the same here, right? So now there's 25 in the pot. He could actually check this here and then bluff the river more effectively. Like, not just because a spade comes off, but because it could look like he has an overpair, or it could look like he has ace queen, and you know, stuff like there's situations. But now, granted, I just happen to have the hand that's never going to fold to him. But there's better ways to play this. And if you are going to go bet, 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 or if you are going to play this one as a bluff, he's got to realize he doesn't have enough chips to play the multi-street game. But if he is, it's better to just check this here, see if I bet. I probably will, and then he can just fold. Or if I decide to check back, I mean, in this case, I might because I'm so far ahead. When the river comes off, he can then jam all in there, and at least you have a shot at a bluff. I don't know what you're possibly representing when you jam this turn here. You're probably representing exactly aces or kings with a spade, and, you know, I have the king of spades. So this is just a really, you know, betting big to try and smash somebody off the pot. It's really never a good idea because it just isn't going to work. I'm calling here with top pair pretty much all the time on the turn. Meanwhile, if we got to the river and he jammed, then I might not call with a queen without a spade. 8-4 suited. Decide to go ahead and call. Rare instance because you can see I'm so far ahead here. I got 100 blinds. That's more than double the average. So basically, I'm just taking this one for its post flop value. But I am the big stack. So it goes check, check, check around, and I think this is a good one where I can now bet the turn. It can look like I have anything. Basically, I'm just banking on the fact that these players don't have a queen. So this is a multi-street bluff. So I'm betting like I have a weak queen here, queen 10, queen jack, something like that. But you're going to have to bet twice in this scenario every time, and you know this. So I call 17 the pot. It's not very likely this player has clubs because I think in late position you would absolutely bet with the clubs. So I think this is a good one, and you just make a value bet here like you have a queen, and if they can't beat you, they can't continue, and that's kind of what happened. I think what happened is, specifically in this one, is this player picked up a heart draw on the turn, but you don't want to check and he rolls over like a 6, you know, like the ace 6 of hearts or something, you know, to get beat. So this is one where you have to bet again. Let's see, aces. Oh, I think this is just a funny hand. Yeah, this is a funny hand. So I have 23 blinds, and this one is just going in a video, so I marked it, but we'll just watch it because it's funny. Raise in a first, call in second, call in third, folds to me. I have 23 blinds. There is no raise here. The only move is all in. I just go ahead and jam. Now the player in first goes all in for his excess chips. So this is, you know, pretty much just a guy with a good pair in first. This is a pretty great scenario for me. Second position folds, obviously. Third position thinks about it for a ton of time. Just a ton of time. And then he goes ahead and calls. And yeah. So I lost that one. I re-entered and ended up cashing this tournament, doing very well. But it was just funny because, like, I don't know what this player's thinking here. Like, I mean, I guess they were short, but if you look at this, if we go back, he's on a starting stack. I mean, he just bought into the tournament. I don't know what's happening here. So, kind of funny, and definitely good enough for a video. Let's see. See a raise. I go ahead and defend, make the pair and flush draw. Pretty damn good. Pretty much got the board smashed. Checks. Now I pick up an open ender. I decide to go ahead. It's time to go ahead and bet. Player check raises, and I thought about just jamming here, but I kind of felt with one card to come, I'm kind of better off just calling, and we are pretty deep into the tournament. Like, we're not deep in stacks. With this kind of equity, I mean, I have 15 outs at least, probably 17. That's 34%. Getting my money in here wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but we were deep in the tournament, and I felt like it wasn't the best move. You can see, you know, even after this bet, I still have 150 or 140,000, so we're doing really well. So I decided just to call and feel like I'm either miles ahead or way behind, and plus I have all the equity in the world. And the player could just be bluffing. That's the other factor. River comes off. I make the flush. I actually thought the ace might be good for me because if he was bluffing with like the suited ace of clubs, maybe he would, you know, jam now. Looking back, this is probably a card for me to jam because my hand looks like such bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do I have the heart flush here when I check the flop, bet the turn, call a raise, and then jam the river? It's kind of unlikely for me to have the heart flush, but it is a great spot for me to bluff. That being said, if he had an overpair, it usually doesn't contain an ace, so now he's not going to call a jam, and I said that too. So I decided to go ahead and check it. The guy took a really long time and then decided to just check back, and shockingly, he had a set of eights. I did say he could just have a set here, in which case I should have jammed. I kind of put him on it because when the flop goes check, check, it really looks like a set, especially when he check raises small on the turn. He's trying to get me to put it in with a draw. So in retrospect, I played the hand perfect, but I think it was one of those ones where I played it perfect through general assumption, not through, oh, he's got a set here and I should just call and make the hand because he's never folding. So it wasn't magic. It was just kind of like these little safety nets that you imply to, you know, when you're up against a monster. So I'm not a genius. It just kind of, you know, my general play style worked out well there. Folds around to me in the small blind. Why is this hand marked? I limp. Oh, okay. Yeah. I remember this one. So this player, VPIP of 30, preflop raise, or 35 VPIP, preflop raise of 30. This player was raising at every possible opportunity. If you raised on the button, he 3-bet from the small blind. If you limped something, he raised. So I decided just to take a high equity hand. Normally I'm raising this 100% of the time. You can see, let's see here. With 40 big blinds, we're going to go to the tools over here and check out the preflop charts, if it'll ever come up. Come on. Tools. Come on. It's acting slow because I have another window with it open. There we go. GTO charts. From the small blind, 40 big blinds, King Jack suited is, I'm pretty sure it's a raise about 70% of the time and a limp re-raise a certain portion of the time, but we're at 40 big blinds. Our position is the small blind. Action is raise first in. King Jack suited is a raise 70% of the time and a call 31% of the time, and we're calling in order to call a raise. There's even cases to be made for limping and then raising behind. That would have been the move with this player, but I decided to just call it, take the high equity to the flop. Flop the flush draw, and we have 35 blinds, and this is basically me just setting up a steal. So he bets about a quarter pot, which is fine. I decided to go ahead and make the big raise. He ends up jamming. This is a unique scenario, I think. I don't think he has anything, but I think this is one where he found a hand he can jam. Usually that's going to be the straight draw, but of course my flushing 2 overcards is definitely good. Let's see what my equities are. 53%. It's definitely worth it. And this player was costing me chips due to his actions quite a bit, so this is a spot I'll definitely take this move all day long. And we made the flush, which is inconsequential, but I think the play is the most important part here. This is I set this up to do this, so absolutely loved it, and this brought me to a really great point in the tournament, and those chips took me a really long way, so it was a very well played hand. Let's go ahead and switch over to the cash games. I did play some Zoom yesterday. Let's see here. Let's close this, bring this one up. It's only a few Zoom hands, but I think they're interesting. Is that big enough? Yeah, okay. So, pocket tens. I go ahead and make a raise. Get 3-bet from the small blind after the button calls. Pretty standard spot. I decided to go ahead and 4-bet. This player, you can see by his numbers, I don't have many hands, but he was 3-betting kind of excessively and playing kind of a lot of hands. So I decided this is a good spot for a 4-bet. It's not overly flashy, but I think people don't realize that when you're 6-handed, you should be 4-betting jacks and 10s a lot. And this is kind of a 4-bet bluff where I'm 4-betting, and if I get jammed on, I'm just going to fold. But if I get called and it's a good flop for me, I'm just going to get the money in. So this is one of those ones where you kind of isolate the ace queens and ace jacks and make them give you too many chips. But this player, he was a better player than that, so he just folded without calling. That's fine. But you just want to 4-bet those sometimes. I just want to throw that in. Let's see here. So I raise. I get 3-bet in the small blind yet again from a much tighter player that I have a lot of hands on. I decide to go ahead and just call because of that. Player checks. I decide to bet 2/3 pot, representing an overpair like something like pocket tens or pocket jacks. In position, you know what I'm saying? It's very reasonable. It's about as reasonable as 4-betting. You can see, though, I would never 4-bet this player. He's only playing 14% of hands. He's only raising, 11% pre-flop. 3-betting only 3%. This is a very, very, very tight player. And he wasn't marked by a color. So I have all these hands on him just from Zoom. So he plays this tight in Zoom is the point here. And he just folds. So he was probably, 3-betting me with a good ace or, like king, queen or something like that. And when I just bet here, I can just take the pot down in position because what is he going to call me with? I mean, he really never has an overpair here. And this is one where the position just kind of worked out and made it work for me. Let's see here. Grats on the big run last night. Still work for me, but I saw you pop online. Nice. Thank you, my man. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a nice run. Ended up second place. I'm actually kind of really happy with it because that dude had 80% of the chips in the tournament, the entire final table, and I like the way I played heads up. He just so happened to, eventually, I'm gonna have to get in there with a hand, and he just so happened to call me in a situation where I only had 3 outs, but I like how I played it. Go ahead and raise 2.5. Get 3-bet by the button. Pretty common thing going on. Player's pretty reasonable. He's not out of line too much, but I decided to go ahead and call. Deuce on the flop, backdoor heart draw. Player bets a little bit less than a third pot. Hey, what's up, DeBoss? Good to see you, my man. I go ahead and call it. This is kind of a float where I'm like waiting to see what happens. When the queen hits the turn, it's kind of awesome for me because he should never have a queen, and I can always have a queen. Like when he 3-bets, he's going to have a lot of ace kings, jacks, tens, even bigger pairs, kings, aces, things like that. So this queen is great for my range, not so great for his because he's never going to bet a queen on the turn here when he hits it. He bets small on the flop, which is reasonable if he had queens, like ace queen or king queen. But then when the turn hits, he bets half pot here, and this is garbage. Nobody's betting a queen like this here. You're either betting much bigger to look like you're bluffing, and if you think you're up against, something that can, pay you off or whatever, like so if you had ace queen, you would bet bigger, or you're betting super small because you're trying to get called. So this just looked like utter bullshit to me. So I go ahead and raise him just for fun. And in truth, I probably have the best hand here about 50% of the time, but I think the other 50% of the time it's a pair like nines, tens, jacks, and they just absolutely cannot continue, especially a hand like nines or eights, and he just folds. So this is a good one to realize why you're floating and what cards are good for you. Like a heart on the turn, I could have just called. An ace or a deuce, obviously I'm raising. A 6 on the turn, I can absolutely play this same move, because I can have all the 6s and he can never have them. Epic final table last night. Thanks, Pocket. Appreciate that, man. Yeah, it was pretty good. I think it was really well, for the most part, very well thought out. And I don't think I made too many mistakes. It was definitely difficult because the like I said, the guy had 70 to 80% of the chips in the tournament, pretty much the whole final table, and he was 2 seats to my left. So that made it, kind of handcuffed me, but came in on the final table in second in chips, and I left in second place. So that's kind of a good result. There's a lot of times when you come in second in chips and end up making mistakes and end up, losing your mind and, going out in eighth, So I was very happy with it. And anytime you can pick up 60 buy-ins, pretty good day. So exploitative preflop jamming. This is one of my favorite sections, and not just because, like my wife said, it's a bad name for a porno. It's my absolute favorite thing. This came up a ton last night, and I was really focused with it, so I think this will be a really great section you guys are really going to love. So let me make sure I have the sound on, and let's get into it.
Now let's discuss one of my favorite plays that has won me a ton of money. That is exploitative preflop jamming. So let's take a look at a situation where I think going all in before the flop is a very valid option. So here, tight aggressive player raises to 2 big blinds, player on the button calls, and then we have 10-9 of spades in the big blind with a 22.
That call with the ace 10 3-handed was money. Yeah, here's the thing. Like you just have to know the value of your hands, and the ace 10 offsuit there. Me and the other guy were pretty much tied in chips. I think I had him covered by like 1 or 2 blinds. It's just a call you have to make. Here's the thing. He's jamming on the button because, and you got to remember the big stack, while he was the big stack, he wasn't a maniac. Like he wasn't even doing things properly. Like he was sitting there in the small blind versus the big blind, who the big blind would have 15 blinds, and he was making it 2.5 blinds, which is big. You know what I'm saying? Or he would do that on the button, which is big for that stage. But what he should have been doing versus that guy, and he had 80 blinds, is he should have just been jamming all in. This is when we were like 7-handed or 6-handed. He should have just been jamming from the small blind every time on this guy until he loses one. That would be the standard play. But he had shown that he was not willing to race. So the guy jamming on the button knows this. You know, we're already 3-handed, and when you get ace-10 3-handed, it's kind of the best hand a lot. And as you can see, he had the jack-10, and I had him dominated, but what's the better hand that he wakes up there with? Ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-king? If that's what I'm afraid of, I need to quit poker, because you have to understand the value of your hands. 3-handed ace-10 can be played like ace-queen, and if you're not getting in ace-queen for whatever it was, 15 blinds at that point, just quit. So it's just understanding the intrinsic nature of the hands. But yeah, it was a well-timed hand, though, because it worked out perfectly. Gave me a fighting chance, too.
Big blind stack. Take a second, ask yourself what you would do here. Well, I think calling is definitely a reasonable option, but I think shoving is very, very fine, too. And I'm about to show you some math as to why that is the case. So in this scenario, when you jam, when you go all in, you will either win a small pot when everyone folds, or you will get called and be all in slightly behind with some dead money in the pot. And fortunately, the value of this play can be solved purely using math. So there's an equation. You don't need to know how to do this at the poker table or anything like that, but there is an equation that will show you how much profit you make by jamming in this spot. And it makes logical sense. So profit equals the percent both opponents fold times the pot that you win. This is when you shove all in and they fold. So X percentage of the time.
The shorthand here is, let's say there's $100 in the pot. If you jamming all in gets a fold 70% of the time, then the move is worth $70 every time you do it, because you win 70% of the pot, right? Even when you're called and lose, you have to understand that in the long term, if a move is 70% successful, you've already made that money just by having the, the knowledge to observe the spot and the, I guess, fortitude to pull the trigger. So that's what we're talking about with the pre-flop fold equity equation. So it can be a winning play and you'll lose. Like you guys have seen me do that on stream where I'm like, well, this is obviously a 90% winning play. The guy just hit the perfect card on the river, but he's just going to go bet all the time. We just had one of those, and I just totally stood by it. And I even reviewed it the next day and said, yeah, this is perfect. Even though I lost the hand, I played it perfectly. So that's the thing you got to realize. So I'll let him fill it.
You win the pot. Next, you add that to the percent of the time the first opponent calls times your equity in the pot times the pot, the total pot whenever you get called, minus the amount you put in the pot. So here's how much we win or lose when we get called, times the percentage of the time that does happen when the first person does call. Then we add that to the percent that the second opponent calls times our total equity in the pot when that happens. So solving for all these numbers will tell you how much you make or lose by shoving in this scenario. And now you just have to make some assumptions, and if your assumptions tend to be pretty right, this equation will be spot on. If your assumptions are wrong, well, they won't be. Also notice if we only have one opponent, notice in this scenario we have the situation where we have a raise and a caller. If there was just the preflop raiser, this entire section of the equation would no longer be here because there's not a second opponent anymore. All right, so let's fill in the blanks. How often do the opponents fold? Well, you need to know each player's preflop strategy at this point, as well as what you think they're going to call your all-in with. And this is the hardest part of figuring this out because you really do have to make some assumptions about your opponent's strategy. So let's assign the initial player a strategy like this. They're gonna raise and then call the all-in with pocket eights and better, ace jack suited and better, ace queen offsuit and king queen suited, and they're gonna raise and then fold out all this other stuff. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. If that is the case, your opponent's gonna call your all-in 33% of the time. If you use, just straight going through here, that's what it says. Nice, clean, and easy, right? So now let's talk about the caller strategy. I think the caller's probably using roughly this strategy. They're 3-betting the best hands, 3-betting some polarized bluffs, right, as they should. If they use exactly this strategy, and they're calling off our 20 big blind jam with these hands in red, notice that has them calling off 35.6% of the time. We'll call it 36% of the time. I do want to make it clear, sometimes the caller has no calling range.
Right.
if they have ace jack suited or ace queen offsuit or pocket nines here, they're just going to fold it if you rip it in.
Yep.
Or they 3-bet those hands to begin with, in which case it's not in their range, right? So as the caller's range gets weaker, they're going to be calling less often.
That's a big factor to remember, because the caller in the middle, like there's a raise here and somebody calls in the middle. A lot of times that person doesn't have a calling range, because if they had a really good hand, they would have 3-bet it themselves, and a really bad hand, they would have just folded. So they're in this kind of middle ground area, and this is why squeezing works. This is also how you can combat somebody who over squeezes, who has this knowledge but doesn't understand that there's people behind him that know that he knows that. So you'll see this scenario, and it happened, I think, 3 times just yesterday, where a player raised an early position, and I had a middle pair, 7s. I think one of them was 7s and 2 of them were 8s. And I was in the cutoff, and the guy in the small blind had a tendency to over squeeze. And my feeling, and I had a lot of chips, I had like 80 blinds, and I think the small blind had like 40 or something like that. So it wasn't insignificant, but it was the kind of thing where, or no, I'm sorry, he had like 30 blinds, the one example I'm thinking of. It's the kind of thing where his only move is really to jam, because 3-betting would put in too much of his stack, because a proper 3-bet would have been like 10 or 12. So this player did go ahead and jam, folded back, the first or initial raiser folded, and now that's a scenario where he's going to win that pot versus population probably 70, maybe 80% of the time, because of the squeeze factor. This was a situation where I was compensating for that and realized that if he jams, I can absolutely call, because he's jamming too wide, and I don't mind racing for this much in a worst case scenario where he rolls over king queen, and I called in this particular one I'm thinking of, and he actually had ace 8, and my 8s held up, and it wasn't unreasonable, and ace 8 is about the same as king queen in that scenario. I was actually a little bit more surprised that he jammed, and that kind of gave me the extra info. If he had 3-bet, it might have been a different story. Like if he had 3-bet to like 7, then the initial raiser may call, and then I'm jamming. But understanding where people are coming from when they're making this play is how you can figure out how to counteract it when you're in the middle like that. So just a small thought. It makes calling off with a pair very easy.
In general.
A pair that you wouldn't play for 30 big blinds versus the initial raiser, but you'd absolutely love to play for 30 big blinds versus the squeezer to your left. So it's kind of a different thing.
Also realize every once in a while both players will call your shove, but that's not going to happen all that often at all, especially given if the initial player calls. Take a look at this range, right? What can this range really call with? The answer is like almost nothing. Okay. So now let's go through here and plug in the numbers that we have. So profit equals the 32% of the time that our opponents fold times the pot we win, plus the 33% of the time the first player calls times our total equity in the pot, plus the 35% of the time the second player calls times our total equity in the pot. Okay, now we're going to use Equilab to figure out our equity with 10-9 suited against each opponent's range. You already know to use Equilab now. So you just put in 10-9 suited, run it against the first player's range. We have 33%. 10-9 suited, run it against the second player's range. We have 39 or 40%. Okay, good. Nice and easy. Plug in that number. 33% here, 39% here. Okay? So now we need to figure out how much we're actually winning in these scenarios. Well, when we win the pot before the flop because everyone folds, we get 26,000 chips. That's going to be the pre-flop raise, the call, the small blind, the big blind, and the ante.
You have to understand, this is a lot of math he's doing here to explain this concept. Nobody's sitting at the poker table doing this math in their head. This is math you do away from the table that allows you to generalize the person's range. So you go, okay, this player opened with this range. Okay, fine. This guy's calling with this range. That means that this hand stacks up against those ranges to this percentage. Then you can look at the pot and go, okay, well then that means if I jam all in, they should be folding roughly this, and that means that this will succeed this much time, and when I get called, you're not going the extra step to say, when I get called, I still win on average 33% of the time, so this is okay to jam all in. You're just sitting there approximating the ranges and going, okay, this is profitable. You just kind of know it because you've done this math away from the table. Like, I heard a long time ago, somebody asked what are top-level poker players thinking about when they're sitting at the table facing a situation, and then all of a sudden they're in the tank after these very automatic moves. What's usually going on is they're doing math, and they're sitting there in their head just kind of like you see Patrick Antonius do it a lot when he's on TV. You'll see him in a situation where he's just kind of spaced out and facing like a 4-bet or a jam or something like that, and he's sitting there doing math, and you'll see him and Phil Ivey, their eyes kind of dart around the table, and what they're doing is they're looking at the other chip stacks if it's a tournament, and they're trying to figure out, okay, is this an ICM spot where I need to take the risk, or can I take this hit to my stack by folding and be okay? And they're doing math. So when you get to that point, yes, you can then do this, but 90% of the time you're not thinking about these exact number situations. You're approximating versus population.
Ante. Let's just go back over here. As we see, the pot is 26,000. That is how much we win. You count your big blind, by the way, because that is no longer your money. That is money that is in the pot. All right, now when we get called, how big will the total pot be when we get called? Well, that's going to be our 88,000 plus our opponent's 88,000 plus any additional money in the pot. That's going to be the other raise, the small blind, and the ante. That's 190,000, right? And the amount we put in the pot is 84,000, because as we see here, that's how much is remaining in our stack. We already have this 4,000 in, but that is not ours. We're only putting in 84,000 more. So now we have all the numbers. We can solve it. Profit equals the percentage of the time the opponent fold times the amount we win when they both fold, plus the percentage of time the first guy calls times our total equity in the pot, plus the percentage of time the second guy calls times our total equity in the pot. Running this math, we lose 2,000 chips, 2,174 chips by jamming. So jamming is not profitable in that scenario given those assumptions. So
because of the way the range plays against those hands. Now, if we have a hand like King Queen or Ace 10 or something like that, these numbers become extremely skewed in our favor, and it becomes a profitable jam because of the blockers and removal. That's why when you do this, you want to have those removal cards, because if they're on our hand, they can't be in the opponent's hand. So every time you have an ace, you remove an ace from the pool. And when you have a Broadway card, you remove one from the pool. That's why having 10-9, it's not profitable, because all those cards are still out there against you, and it's a problem because you don't know what's going on. But every time you reduce by one, like if you have Ace Jack right here, it's actually kind of a great jam because you've removed combinations of King Jack, Queen Jack, Ace Jack, things like that. Ace King, Ace Queen is far less likely. Ace 10, you know what I'm saying, gets removed. That's a calling hand that you would beat, but you kind of take and give. My favorite in this scenario is probably King Queen, because the hand on its own stands up quite a bit, and you having King Queen makes less combinations of Ace King, Ace Queen, which are really the hands that dominate you, and more often when you jam there, you get called by pairs. So in that situation, it's a race. You're 45%, but you're now getting better than 2-1 on that call on your money. So it's a purely profitable situation. King Jack suited is also a great one in that scenario. King Jack itself can do it, but for the value of the hand, I think I like King Jack suited. King Queen offsuit is enough, though.
we should pick a different play, which is actually what I did in the game. I did decide to just call. However, if the opponents fold just a little bit more often, this situation will become profitable. So what happens if the second caller, or the initial caller, never calls our shove? Well, now remember that last part of the equation, the third part vanishes. So now we have 67% the times that both players fold, times the pot we win, plus the 33% of the time the first player calls. Remember, the second player never calls in that assumption. Now we profit 10,391 chips. That is huge. If you're profiting more than like a big blind in this scenario, it is usually worth going for. In this scenario, the big blind was 4,000. This is 2.5 big blinds. This is huge. So understand that this is a very, very strong play if your opponents are going to be folding too often, whether the initial raiser is too loose, whether the caller is too weak, whatever it is. If they're going to be folding more often than is reasonable, then you get to shove very, very wide. Okay? Interestingly enough, notice here our equity was 33% against our opponent's calling range. Hands that are worse, ace-x offsuit, weaker suited connectors, etc., they're usually going to have about 29% equity against a reasonable call-off range that we gave our opponent, which means this number will become 29%, and nothing else changes in this equation. take a second, do the math yourself, you're going to find that it is still going to be a profitable shove. This number here is going to be a little bit higher, which is a negative number. That's bad for us, but it's still going to be nowhere near 17,000. So interestingly enough, your fold equity here, the amount you win when your opponents fold, this number is overriding the times that your one opponent now is going to call you. All right, now let's assume your opponent calls the all-in 50% of the time instead. So this is a spot where one player raises, the other guy calls, but that caller is always going to fold. Then we are in the big blind. If the initial raiser is going to call 50% of the time, that's with this range. This is starting to get pretty loose. You see, in this scenario, we are going to now lose 240 chips. So calling the preflop raise is still going to be better in that scenario. Okay, now let's assume the opponent raises from late position with a range that is a bit too wide. Notice here they're raising 50% of hands.
This is where the exploitative jamming comes in, because when players are opening in the cutoff and you're in the button or small blind, you have a lot more 20 big blind jams. So this is where it becomes really, this is the meat of this section right here.
Instead of the optimal strategy we gave them earlier, where they're raising 20% of hands. Let's say they're raising 50% of hands, and they're still going to call off with a decently wide range. In that scenario, it turns out we do all this math again. I already showed you how to do it. Do it yourself if you feel like it. You can make an Excel spreadsheet if you feel like it. Do whatever you want to make this easy for yourself. In this scenario, profit will now be 5,000. Again, if you're profiting more than about a big blind or so in these scenarios, you really cannot turn it down. So notice here that if we're against the one player who's going to be raising way too wide, and then the caller is not going to call very often, which I really do think is going to be the case. Whenever someone raises, someone calls, and then you jam, the caller almost never, ever, ever calls your all-in. So this is a situation that does come up a lot. If the initial raiser is too loose, they're just not going to call your jam often enough, allowing you to make a good profit. Let's assume the same range now, but the initial raiser under defends. Now they're only going to call off with hands that they think are good. Remember, I do want to make this clear here. Like in this assumption, we're assuming this guy raises and then calls a 22 big blind all in with ace 10 offsuit, king jack offsuit, pocket fives, ace 8 suited. A lot of people don't do that. That's a pretty loose call. If now they call with just the obviously good hands, you see now we are making a huge amount of profit, 11,000 chips, and that is just way.
Because they fold so much. That's the end of the sentence that was left off there. We're making that profit because we get the majority of folds. They're only calling 16% of the time, or 16% of the hands that they're playing. So because we get so many folds, we win. And when we do get called, sometimes we're okay. We're versus 8-8, 8-8, and 7-7, which is a straight race. And other times, we're up against unpaired cards, which we're 60-40 against. You know what I'm saying? It's only really bad for us when they have the overpairs, which is only, 5 of these hands that really truly have us crushed. So that's what he's talking about, is because of the overfolding that happens.
Way too much to turn down. So the main takeaways here are that against tight ranges, you should not be shoving wide. Why? Because they're going to call you enough, and they're going to have enough equity to where you're just going to be running into a good hand too often. If an under the gun player raises with like pocket eights or better and ace queen or better, and they're going to call your all in with almost all of it, you have almost no fold equity. You want that first part of the equation, the percentage of the time your opponents fold times the pot you win when they fold, to be large. You want that very first number, the percentage of the time they fold, to be big. So you should be shoving wider over loose ranges, because loose ranges will drastically under defend, right? You also want to target late position raisers. Usually late position raisers are going to be raising a little bit too wide. Think about from the button, right? The players on the button should be raising 44% of hands. And, usually they're not going to be calling off all that wide. Like right here, this red call-off range is 12% of hands. And in this spot, we see that if they are defending something like this strategy, it's just going to end up being very, very profitable for you, right? So definitely shove over people who should be loose and people who will under defend. In multi-way pots, it perhaps gets even better.
See, and the thing is, it's because you're doing it at 20. You're doing it at this blind level, the 22 to 35 big blinds, because you're removing the pot odds for them to call. Having 10 big blinds and jamming like this is not effective, because you don't have fold equity. The player can say, well, somebody raised, somebody called, that's 2 big blinds, 4 big blinds, there's blinds and antes in the pot, you know what I'm saying, that's another 2.5, that's 6.5. This guy from the, or that's 6. This guy from the small blind jammed for 10 total. So it's going to cost me 8 big blinds to win 16. I'm now getting 2-1 on this call. I can make this call all day with king 10. You don't want that to be the scenario. In that same scenario, when you shove even just 20 big blinds, it costs him 18 to win 26, which is a far less profitable scenario, and it's much bigger risk. So your fold equity has to be much higher because of the size of your stack. That's why you're doing it at this blind level.
It may seem like you're going to be getting called more often, but in reality, if you're shoving for enough chips, like 22, 25 big blinds, etc., you're actually just getting additional dead money put in the pot, which makes you win more money. Well, in both scenarios, whenever they all fold, you win more money, and when they call, there's more dead money in the pot that you just get to take your percentage of. So this is a very, very strong play in multi-way pots, especially when the initial raiser is a little bit too loose. Also, notice this hand was from the big blind. If you're in the earlier positions, you should jam a little bit tighter than the math will recommend. And that's just because now you have to worry about all the players yet to act waking up with a strong hand. So that's why you're going to see if like someone raises under the gun and someone calls, even if you know those two players are both loose, you can't jam from the low jack seat all that wide because you have to worry about the hijack, the cutoff, the button, the small blind, and the big blind all waking up with a top 4 or 5% hand they're just always going to call with. So from the later positions, you should be jamming a little bit tighter. So this play is especially powerful when loose players or late position players raise, and then you are also in late position. So definitely look for spots like this. If these plays profit more than about 1 big blind, they are just like automatic shoves. And you may actually find there are a lot of spots like this. Remember how I said that even worse hands, like the 10-9 suited has 33% equity against a reasonable calling range. The worse hands have 29-ish% equity. If your opponents fold too often, that back into the equation really doesn't matter all that much because it's only getting multiplied by 0.33 or 0.25 or whatever it is, the percentage of the time your opponents call. So if that number is low, your equity in those scenarios doesn't actually matter all that much because that happens infrequently. Now, you have to understand whenever you do make these plays, you are going to get broke sometimes. You may say, well, every time I shove, don't I just like go broke 15 or 20% of the time? Because they're going to call you 33% of the time and you're going to go broke half of that time or a little bit more. So half of 33 plus a little bit more is, let's call it 20%. And the answer is yes, you're going to go broke 20% of the time when you make these plays. But these plays are highly profitable. If you make highly profitable plays over and over and over again, eventually you're going to chain together a bunch of highly profitable plays and they just all work. Also realize sometimes they're going to spike on your opponent. When you jam that 10-9 suited and they call with ace-king, you're going to win sometimes. Then you just have a big stack and you get off of this medium to shallow stack that's kind of tough to play. You get a bigger chip stack and that allows you to continue leaning on your opponents, which will work out way better for you because you get to apply bits of pressure to them and put them in tough spots. And a lot of people you'll find will not make this big all-in shove without a very strong hand, and that allows you to just pick up a lot of small pots where they are playing a little bit too tightly. One of the biggest reasons a lot of recreational players do not win at poker tournaments is because they are content to just hang around with this 20 big blind stack and wait for the nuts. But if you do that, you're going to blind out, and this is a powerful strategy, jamming over late position raisers and loose raisers with a wide range that will, well, either result in you getting a whole lot of chips or going broke, but every time you make this play, it is going to add a decent amount of profit to your stack. And if you make profitable plays over and over again, you will win in the long term, even if those plays are relatively high risk.
It's all that philosophy of not being afraid to go bust so you can win the tournament, because it reminds me of a hand. This is years ago. It was at a tournament I was dealing at the Venetian, and we were on break, and it was the final table, and this player came up to me, and he was asking me about a hand that got dealt, and I was playing full time pretty much, and he asked me, he's like, this is what I had in this scenario during this hand, what do you think I should have done? And it was almost this exact thing, and this is long before everything was on the internet. Like, you just kind of knew this stuff, you kind of talked it out with friends, you experimented and you found it. And at the time I was more of a cash game player, so my tournament strategies were not as well rounded, but on a final table I was very strong because I learned how to play most of my poker playing single table sit and goes. So I understood final table dynamics and the pressure that it put on people, and if I had realized it at the time, I could have used it in the middle stages of tournaments and done very, very, or much better than I had done. But I was basically approximating this move, and the situation was that the guy had Ace Jack, and you got to remember this is back in 2006, so poker played much differently. But it was a final table, which plays more the way middle stages of tournaments play now, if that makes sense. And he had Ace Jack on the button, and what had happened is a player had raised, another player had called it from the what was it, the low jack and the high jack, and both these players were big stacks running the table over, and this dude was I think fifth in chips, and it was all very close though. Like the fourth through eighth guys who were on the table, or seventh guys who were on the table, I think it was only seven-handed at that time, they were all pretty much the same. So the top two guys had a lot, the third place guy had a bunch, and then there was a steep drop, and it was fourth through seventh. So there was this ICM situation that was going on that was causing these players to just fold. And the worst part of it was this guy was like, it was like number one in chips, number two in chips, number three in chips. Then he's sitting here as like fifth or sixth, seventh place chips, like tied in chips with those guys. And then all the other guys are next to him. So it was basically like the most chips was in the one seat, and then a little less, a little less, a little less, a lot less, a little less, a little less, a little less. So he was right in the middle, and right in the middle between the stacks. Now, I told him he's in the best spot to do better of the bottom three stacks because he had all the chips on his right. And you, like we talked about last night, you win from your right and you lose to your left, right? So he could put so much pressure on these players. It was insane. And he could fade all the big hands from these guys. He could just get out of the way. So he asked me what I would have done with Ace Jack on the button, and I said I'd jam all in that scenario. And he's like, I remember him saying very clearly, he's like, it wasn't suited. And I go, it doesn't matter. I said, honestly, I'm jamming anything good there. I told him I'm probably going all the way down to jamming King Jack offsuit, which is probably wrong. But I said, with your stack, 22 blinds, these other guys have 80 blinds. They're not going to be willing to take that risk, but they are going to be willing to open and just steal. And now you've got one of them squeezed in between. These players are loose as fuck. If you make this move, you're going to get the fold, blah, 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 blah. We went through this whole debate, and I remember he said to me, you know what, I'm thinking you might be right, but if I lose, I'm going to be pissed. And I go, don't blame me, man. It's your fucking entry. And I walked away, and I was kind of pissed at him. I went on break, and I came back, and he was now third in chips, and there were still 7 players at the table. I tapped in, I dealt a down, and then it went on break, and everybody got up and left, and he sat there and waited, and as soon as everybody was gone and I have to sit dead, he told me, he's like, it's working every time. And I was just like, like whatever. And he ended up getting third in the tournament, which he was pretty much resigned to getting, like fourth or fifth, right? And it was like huge. And he actually tipped well, and he actually tipped me on the side. And it ended up being a really powerful thing. And it's just kind of an anecdotal thing. And he did go out on that move three-handed when there was a raise and a call, and he jammed it again for like 22 blinds. And he had a decent hand, but it was like King 10 or something. And he just happened to run into a pair of nines, and he went out of the tournament. But, he was very happy coming in third, and he was able to ladder up. And he said after the first time he did it, when he saw the reactions, he knew that it was going to work the majority of the time. So he just completely adopted it, and it worked out well for him. And it's one of those things where you have to realize the true dynamic of your stack and the pressure that you can put on, even on a big stack, because they don't want to become a middle stack. Like, that's part of the game. So it was very interesting, and it just kind of rings true with this whole section. And like I said, this is like one of my favorite parts of playing tournaments now, is because you turn your 22 big blind stack into such a powerful thing, and now you're getting a chance to get back in the tournament and kind of like, you can do more than you think you can. It's really interesting. All right, let's start the quiz. Loose aggressive player in the cutoff raises 2 big blinds out of 25 big blinds. 25 big blinds effective. Everyone folds to you with the 10 of clubs, 7 of diamonds in the big blind. You think the cutoff is raising with 40% of all hands that will call your all in 10% of the time. What percentage of the time will the cutoff call if you go all in? Well, if he's raising with 40% of hands that will call your all-in range 10% of the time. So he's going to call off your all-in. Let's see, the cutoff is raising with 40% of all hands, and will call your raise 10% of all hands. Okay, I see what they're saying. So he's raising 40%, and he's calling off 10% of that. So he's going to call you 25% of the time. Right. 40%, 10% of 40 is 25% of the time. Okay. Everyone folds to a loose aggressive player in the cutoff who raises 2 big blinds at 25 big blinds effective. Everyone folds to you in the big blind with 10 times suited. Okay. You think the cutoff is raising 40% of hands and will call your all in with 10% of hands. How much will you win if you go all in and your opponent folds? Well, he made it 2. There's, let's see, we're in the big blind, so there's blinds and antes. If I go all in, I win 1.5 plus his, I win 3.5 blinds. No, 4.5. Oh, I didn't count the big blind. You're right. You win 4.5 big blinds, the opponent folds. Right. His 2 plus the big blind, or plus the antes and the small blind and big blind. I didn't count the big blind. That's right. Yeah, because that's already out there. Okay. Same scenario. 40%. How much of the total pot be if you go all in? How much will the total pot be if you go all in and get called? Well, you're going in for 25 big blinds. There's his 25, my 25, and the blinds and antes. That's 51.5. Yeah. This is just getting you to the math is what he's doing. These are all the little stages of the math. If you think the cutoff is raising with 40% hands, we'll call your all in with 10% hands. How much do you risk by going all in? Well, that's easy enough to say. He's going to call 10% of the time. You go all in for 20 big blind or 25 big blinds. He's going to call you 10% of the time. What's the risk? Let's see, 25, 10% is 25, 5 big blinds. So you're risking 20 big blinds because it's a 5 big blind profitable play, right? No, wrong. Oh, it's just asking straight math. I'm jumping ahead. I thought we were talking about overall, how profitable are you? You think the cutoff is raising 40% of hands and will call your all in with 10% of all hands. How often does 10-7 need to win against the cutoff's 10% calling range? How often does it win? Well, if he has a 10% calling range, let's go to Equilab here. Let's see, Equilab. Let's see if the cutoff is raising with 40% of hands. So let's just do this. Let's see here. Yeah, it's about 40%. There you go. So we can apply that. Okay. And it says, and we'll call your all in with 10% of hands. How often does 10-7 need to win versus the cutoff 10% calling range? Oh, I guess I should do like 10 of spades, 7 of clubs. What the fuck? 10 of spades, 7 of clubs. Okay. Needs to win 35% of the time. 30% of the time. Why is it so low? Oh, I see what it's... Oh, it needs to win versus the cutoff's calling range 30% of the time because 3 out of 4, so that's why they... Okay, yeah. Okay, so it's not the true equity. We need to win... We're going to win less, so he's calling us with less. So we need to win less overall. Okay. I put in the whole range I shouldn't have. Okay, this is getting complicated. You think out if the cutoff is raising with 40% of all hands and will call your all in with 10% of hands, how much do you win or lose by going all in with 10-7? Okay, this is the thing. How much do you win or lose? So now we can do the math. All right. So there's going to be 50 blinds in the pot plus blinds and antes is 1.5 more for that because you're in the big blind. So this is the total pot minus the amount of times you get called and win plus the times you call and get lose. Okay, so he's going to call you 10% of the time when you jam all in, and yours is your 10-7. You have to win 30% of the time. I'm doing all the math in my head. It's kind of crazy. I believe this is a losing play at 1.24. I may be flipping the numbers, and it might be a winner, but yeah, I flipped the numbers. It's positive 1.24. Yeah, profit is 0.75 times 4.5 plus 2.25. Yeah, I flipped the numbers and went backwards. So this is a winning play. You profit in this spot because your opponent is folding too often versus your all in. That's basically the concept. If he's only calling with 10% of the hands that he's raising with, then obviously it's a profitable call. So I flipped it. That's why it's a wake up with me. My brain's not fully awake. The concept I know, the specific hand I didn't know. I probably would miss that one in game, so I should look at it a little bit closer, but I think at the levels I play, I like the range that I jam. I think it's fine. So maybe I need to review this one more off stream because I didn't do very well in the quiz, but I know the concept, and I mean I think that final table last night kind of proved that. Let's see, how long is this section? 8 minutes. Yeah, let's go ahead and go through it. I feel good, and I'm probably not playing today, so let's go a little longer.
Now let's discuss when you're facing a preflop raise and a call before the action gets to you, playing between 22 and 35 big blinds deep. So against tight ranges, this is going to be when the initial raiser has a very strong hand, or when you think the caller is especially strong for some reason. You're going to want to make sure that you just play good, fundamentally sound poker, because in those scenarios, the initial raiser is usually going to be able to defend pretty well if you go all in. So you're not going to be able to use the wide, exploitative, all-in shoving strategy we just mentioned in the previous section of this masterclass. So against a tight aggressive player, play fundamentally sound poker where you 3-bet small with the absolute best hands plus a few blocker bluffs. You 3-bet all in with the high-ish equity hands like the middle pocket pairs, hands like ace-queen, maybe queen-jack suited, etc. And then you call with a pile of good suited connected hands, suited aces that flop very, very well. Against a very tight initial raiser, you're going to want to now fold the big cards that are often dominated. So where you may could justify calling a hand like king-jack for a 2 big blind raise if you're on the button or the cutoff against a tight aggressive player, against a nitty raiser who's just raising with the best hands, you should just fold hands like king-jack. You should still continue to call with your implied odds hands, like 10-9 suited. When you start to talk about the marginal implied odds hands, like 8-6 suited or 7-6 suited or 6-5 suited, you can still fold those in most scenarios unless you're in the big blind closing the action. And that's just because those hands really do need to get the full 20-1 implied odds. And usually when you're facing a raise and a caller, you'll be getting more like 15-ish to 1 implied odds. So you can still continue with the good implied odds, the pairs, the suited connectors, and the suited aces, as long as they are the decent ones. And you also want to 3-bet much less often. If you are going to use a hand like ace-jack offsuit as a 3-bet bluff, realize that you don't want to jam all in with that. You're going to instead want to 3-bet small and then fold to an all-in if the nitty initial raiser does decide to shove on you.
The 3-bet bluff scenario is one that I think lower-level players don't understand, where there's a lot of hands you can 3-bet with that you do not have to continue with. Like, you're 3-betting to get the fold. You know what I'm saying? In scenarios where you'd like to get called, if you want to look weaker, then you can jam. Like the ace-king suited is a great one for that. Versus the ace-jack offsuit, you're 3-betting, to put on a squeeze. But if you get jammed on by the initial raiser, you can pretty much be sure your ace-jack is just trash. So you can fold it. And don't be afraid to do that. And, people will speculate, especially in live poker, people will speculate that you 3-bet and then folded, and versus this, because of this one instance, they're going to think you're a loose player who's just trying to always squeeze. If you stay balanced and do it correctly, you're going to be amazed how many times you make the same 3-bet and the person jams on you and you call them with a good hand because, you're balanced and you have queens, kings, aces, ace, king, ace, queen suited, hands like that, and they roll over something like ace 10, raising out of first position or middle position, and you're like, what? Like, that's because they took this small impression of you and extrapolated it to make you a crazy loose guy who will make a shot every time, but then he folds because he's just raising everything. And they don't understand that there's qualifiers to what you're doing. So that's why you're not just doing it with any hand, you're doing it with a decent hand that, then you can fold. But calling the ace jack makes no fucking sense, because when you make the ace, where are you? You know what I'm saying? Like if you just call in that scenario with the ace jack, like on the button, and let's say the the low jack raised and the cutoff called, and you raised ace jack on the button, and you know you get 3-bet or you get 4-bet and you fold, cool. But if you just call that bet and now it comes off ace 5-4 and the initial raiser bets, now what? Like, it's not like you even have ace queen where you can kind of figure it out. Like, he can have ace king and ace queen and you're just crushed. Like, you just don't know where you're at. So you're better off just playing the hand as a 3-bet bluff in that scenario and finding out if you get the fold. And if you get called and you make the ace, now it's better, because the initial raiser would have 4-bet ace king for sure, and he may have even 4-bet ace queen. A lot of players do from those late positions because they understand this dynamic. So your ace jack now becomes so much more strong. I've been in this exact scenario, I think 2 days ago, where I 3-bet the ace jack. I got called by the initial raiser. The initial caller folded. Flop came off ace high, and I just checked the flop because I felt like I was miles ahead. It went check, check on the flop. The guy bet the turn, and then the river he checked, and I jammed, and he called it, and he had pocket queens. And the board was like ace 10, 4, 5, 3, and I just have the ace. But my range, but it becomes so much stronger in that instance because he showed me what was going on, and he bet the turn for value and some protection in case there was like a draw or something. But when the river came off, he was expecting it to go check, check. So when I jammed, he goes, oh, this guy doesn't have an ace here. He would have bet the flop. Well, no, I'm trapping. And because I was able to trap wider with the ace jack than just, the ace king and ace queen, it allowed for this extra move where I was able to bust this opponent. So it's little things like that you got to understand of why you're 3-bet folding some hands. You're 3-betting some hands with the absolute intention to fold. Because when you get 4-bet, your hand is garbage. When you get called, your hand is better.
So you're going to want to be 3-bet bluffing much less often. If, like, middle position is a tight player and they raise, and then let's say the hijack calls and you're on the button with ace-jack offsuit, I would tell you just to call if you're against an actually really, really tight raiser, or maybe even fold. Yeah. I would have, like, no bluffing range in that scenario. You might say, well, isn't that exploitable? Yes, but realize you are adjusting to take advantage of what your opponents do incorrectly. Now, against loose ranges, remember, this is a scenario where when it goes raise, call before you, you can conceivably shove very, very wide. So definitely keep that play available to you. But in general, you should still have a calling range against some players, and you're going to just want to expand your calling range overall. We've discussed specifically Queen 8 suited a few times when we were discussing deeper stacks, but now I want to say that Queen 8 suited becomes a fold in basically all scenarios besides when you're in the big blind.
Yeah.
That said, if you're on the button or the cutoff with a hand like Queen 9 suited or Jack 9 suited or 10-8 suited or 9-8 suited, these are definitely hands that you can call with. Usually the suited hands that have 1 or 2 gaps between them, as long as both cards are something like a 7 or higher, they're pretty good. It's like 9-7 suited is acceptable. But once you start talking like 8-6 suited, 8-5 suited, Queen 8 suited, Jack 7 suited, those now become not quite good enough to play in pretty much any scenario unless you are closing the action in the big blind. You're also going to want to call...
Because the straights you're going to make aren't going to be strong enough often enough, because there's going to be other straights available too often when you have hands like, 8-5 and things like that. But a hand like 9-7 that makes a straight, you're almost always making the best straight, so it's good enough.
Call with the big unsuited cards more that are often ahead. Although, again, you could certainly just jam all in with them if you do think you have a lot of fold equity. Also, the high equity hands are pretty much always going to be all-ins, like ace-10, ace-jack, ace-queen, middle pairs, maybe hands like queen-jack suited. Those are hands that when it goes raise, call in front of you, you can just shove all in, and you're going to be fine. That's just very often the right strategy. That's not even that exploitative strategy we discussed earlier. It's the same play, but you're just doing it because these are the perfect hands to do it with. All right, if the initial raiser is a calling station, again, you should expand your range a little bit, but that said, Queen 8 suited is not going to be quite good enough anymore. You are going to want to go all in with hands that are often ahead, like King Jack offsuit, depending on exactly how your opponents are going to play. Again, when I say a calling station, it's very important to realize some calling stations will be very tight when they raise preflop. If that's the case, you should maybe treat them more like a nitty player. But if they're going to be raising with a loose-ish range, and then they will call all in very wide, and you will find some players who do that, then you can just start jamming way wider for value with hands like ace-10, king-queen, king-jack, because they're going to call you with king-9 suited because they think that's what they're supposed to do.
It's a scenario that I usually call when players get chip drunk, meaning they have so many fucking chips that they're just not folding anything when you jam on them. Like a guy who has 100 big blinds and you jam 25 blinds, you'd be amazed how often people will call that with like King Jack offsuit or King 10 offsuit or Queen 9 suited or things like that, just because they're drunk on their stack. They're just sitting there going, oh, well, I'm unbeatable, I'm whatever. So they just go ahead. And it's not till after they lose the hand that they realize, holy shit, I just risked 25% of this gigantic stack versus a player with this just total trash hand. And, you know, now they're down to 75 blinds. And there's a player at the table now who has 55 or 60 blinds. And they're fucked. They don't have the same amount of control. Like, you'll see players make this mistake a lot. So the calling stations that are loose with the calls post flop, you got to realize that's going to come into effect a lot of times versus big stacks who are late raising loose but not tightening up to the 3-bets. The guy who we played on the final table last night, he was loose properly pre-flop with his big stack, but he wasn't loose with the call-offs. He preserved his big stack the whole time. It was very well played.
And also, you should just be going all in with a very strong linear range straight up for value, because, like I said, they're going to be calling you with many, many, many inferior hands. All right, so putting that all together, again, we have the same chart as before. As you see, against a tight player, 3-bet bluff way less often, call with implied odds more often. Against a calling station, you're going to be wanting to 3-bet more for value. I suppose a play I should mention, by the way, is whenever a calling station raises and someone calls, if you do have a hand like ace, jack offsuit, if you don't think it's strong enough to jam, you could conceivably 3-bet it small. When I say small, to like 8 big blinds, and then just realize you're printing a ton of value when your opponent does call. So there certainly are calling stations. When they raise, someone calls, you can 3-bet, they'll call, and when they're calling, you're going to be ahead. And when they jam all in, it's usually only going to be with exactly aces, kings, queens, and ace-king, which allows you to fold. So that's certainly a play you could make. It's almost like against a nitty player, except for you're picking bluffs that make logical sense, usually with 2 big blockers. Against a loose aggressive player, usually just going to want to be jamming it all in way more often because you have an immense amount of fold equity, as we discussed previously. And against a tight aggressive player, just play good, fundamentally sound poker. Now, from the big blind, again, closing the action, getting a good price, and closing the action are not good reasons to justify. They're not good reasons to justify defending your blind very, very wide when you're in a multi-way pot. Because again, if you flop something like one pair, you pretty much have to be getting it all in if it's a decent one-pair hand. But your opponents are never going to fold any better hands. Like if you have king 6 offsuit and someone raises and 3 people call and you call and it comes any king on the flop, you're basically stuck putting your money in and you're going to be dominated a large portion of the time. So definitely be careful with the big card, little card hands because those will end up costing you a ton of money in very multi-way pots. Also remember that jamming all in with hands with equity, like, you know, pocket 7s or ace 10 offsuit, or hands with just an ace blocker sometimes. If it goes raise, call, 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 and you have ace 2 offsuit in the big blind, that's a fine spot to jam if you think you have a lot of fold equity. So, against a raise and a call, hands like king 6 offsuit, queen 7 offsuit, jack 5 offsuit, these should essentially always be folded. They are nowhere near good enough to play, even getting amazing odds, because they're just not going to flop well enough. And then, with hands like ace X offsuit, king X suited, and queen X suited, these should usually be folded against tight raisers or a very large number of opponents. Usually you're going to find, though, that when you start to get shallow stacked, it's not going to go like raise from early position and then 7 callers and then you're in the big blind. That's just not going to happen all that often. Usually you're going to be in a heads up or 2-way or a 3-way pot, maybe a 4-way pot. And in those scenarios, it's probably okay to continue with all these hands, unless, again, the initial raiser is very, very tight. So, like while I said, you could conceivably jam with ace X offsuit against a loose raiser and a bunch of callers. Ace X offsuit against a tight raiser and a bunch of callers should just be folded, and that's because you're going to be severely dominated. This is where a lot of people get themselves in trouble because they think they're supposed to just look at a chart and follow the chart every single time, but realize your initial opponent, the first person who raises, their strategy is very, very important, and it is going to heavily, heavily, heavily dictate your strategy overall. So make sure you are paying attention and adjusting accordingly.
Let's do the quiz. Under the gun +1 raises out of a 25 big blind stack. Everyone folds 2 in the big blind with 7-5 suited. I think this is a good one just to call. Honestly, this is a defense. We don't have any real information on the player. Like, it doesn't say he's loose or he's tight or whatever like that. So I like a call here. Yeah, because the hand just flops well enough, and it's costing us only one big blind to play for. What is that? Two, like 5.5 big blinds. Yeah, so we're definitely calling there. Low jack raises the two big blinds, 25 big blind stack. Everyone folds two in the big blind with queen five off. Again, we don't have information against this player, and it's not really a great blocker hand. Like if we had queen 10, yeah, or queen jack, sure, but I think this is a fold. Yeah, it's not going to have enough equity when short stacked. Yeah, you better off just protecting your chips there. Under the gun plus two raises, hijack, and the cutoff call. You're on the button with ace jack. I like the jam here. This is that scenario. Now you could 3-bet small, meaning 7 or 8 blinds and see what happens. But honestly, I like the jam here because we're talking about low jack raising, the hijack and cutoff calling, and you're on the button with best position. I honestly like the all-in. There are some cases to be made for just calling, but I think I like the jam here. Yeah, strong enough to jam. Simple question, but it's good to think out all the reasons before. Like you can say, oh, it's ace jack. It's definitely strong enough. But why is it strong enough? It's because of when you jam on the initial raiser, he has to worry about the two guys who call behind him. And when the initial raiser folds, the second guy has to worry about the guy behind him. And when the third guy gets folded too, on the cutoff, he's sitting there going, well, I was just playing trash anyway most of the time. You know what I'm saying? He's not going to call you with a pair of fives. You know what I'm saying? Or even a pair of tens doesn't look great there. You know what I'm saying? Because you jammed into all these players. So cutoff raises two big blinds, and the button calls. You were in the small blind with ace five suited. Ooh, this is one I really like for a jam, but I know that there is a strategy of 3-betting here. But I think in tournaments, most of the time, if I don't have any information, I'm probably jamming here. Yeah, definitely strong enough to go all in. But it's close. Because if I knew that the players were loose, pre-flop, but tight post, maybe that's a better case for jamming. But it also means that raising to 7 big blinds, sometimes I'm going to get them to call and fold post-flop very easily. So it kind of depends. Although I think the overall safer move is just the jam. It kind of depends the stage of the tournament. Like on a final table, maybe you want to just 3-bet this. But generally, I think you're going to be jamming all in here. Yeah. I'm going to mark this as complete, and I want to see how many sections are left in this section. So I want to go back to the courses. Where is it? There it is. I want to see how many parts are left. Maybe we can finish this up today. If there's 2 sections left, I'm not going to do it. Let's see here. There's 3 left. Yeah, okay, so we'll finish this section up tomorrow. So it says it's when you get called and when you call and get 3-bet, facing a raise and a 3-bet, facing a pre-flop 4-bet. Okay, cool. Pretty easy stuff to come, pretty self-explanatory, but I definitely want to take it on its own. These 2 parts of this section are the most important. The exploiting the pre-flop jamming and facing the pre-flop raise. I think if you rewatch this Wake Up With Me a few times, it would do well for you. Because this move, understanding this, will take you further in tournaments than anything else, I think. Because you're going to live your life at 22 to 35 big blinds in tournaments the majority of the time. But this helps you stay at that stack even as the blinds go up. You're going to stay at 22 to 35 big blinds and you're not going to be affected. Or you're going to get a chance to, jump way up. And, like we said, that 80%, fold ratio does mean you lose 20% of the time. You're going to lose 20% of the time, but it's better than just jacking around in a tournament for hours and not getting anywhere and just min-cashing shit. So this to me is my favorite part of poker right now. All that. Well, that and cashing out. That's always my favorite. I'm going to go ahead and end it. I don't think there's anybody here. I'm going to send you guys off to a host. I'm probably not playing today. If I do come back, I'm going to be playing some cash. I have a lot of editing to do for the next Jedi Mind Trick. Hopefully I want to be able to release that tonight. If I don't finish it tonight, it probably won't get released till Monday because Saturday and Sunday are big play days, but we'll see what happens. Who knows? I thank you guys for coming out and appreciate all the follows. Got a bunch of people on the YouTube and everything. That's great because I'm trying to get that going. And yeah, a lot of fun. So I'll see you guys, if not later today, then tomorrow at noon for the next Jedi Mind Trick, or the next Wake Up With Me when we finish up this section. Have a great day, guys. Stick around for the host.